A millionaire takes his 10-year-old daughter to a fancy restaurant for a special dinner. But when he is served, he is shocked to see a little girl identical to his daughter serving the tables. The past comes flooding back when he remembers that his wife died giving birth to twins, and is told that only one survived. Now faced with the truth hidden for years, he must discover who lied to him and why. If this story interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, tell us which city you're watching us from, and we'll keep going. Eric Miller adjusted his Italian silk tie as he studied his daughter Isabel in the mirror. The 10-year-old, with her perfectly coiffed brown hair and navy blue dress, was the spitting image of his late wife, Emilia. This evening promised to be special. It was Isabel's birthday, and he had booked a table at La Maison, the city's most exclusive restaurant. "Are you ready, Princess?" Eric asked, extending his hand to his only daughter. Her smile lit up the entrance hall of the Miller mansion, located in the city's most exclusive neighborhood. "Yes, Daddy. I can't wait to try that chocolate soufflé you've been talking about so much," Isabel replied, her eyes shining with anticipation. During the ride in the black Porsche, Eric couldn't help but smile as he listened to Isabel chatter about her day at school. It was moments like these that made him momentarily forget the pain he had been carrying for a decade. The loss of Emilia during the birth of the twins was still a wound that, although healed on the surface, throbbed deep within him. La Maison was housed in a restored historic mansion in the heart of the city. The Art Deco facade and arched windows created an atmosphere of refinement that justified its reputation as a meeting place for São Paulo's high society. The maître d' welcomed them with the deference reserved for the most important clients, leading them to a privileged table near the balcony that overlooked the interior garden. "Mr. Miller, it's always a pleasure to welcome you. Sophia will be your waitress tonight," the maître d' announced, making a discreet gesture to a young woman who was approaching with menus. It was at that moment that Eric's world stopped. The waitress approaching couldn't have been more than 16, but it wasn't her youth that struck him. It was her face. It was like looking at Isabel through a mirror of time, a few years older. The same almond-shaped eyes, the same delicate shape of her face, even the way a small lock of hair stubbornly fell over her forehead. Everything was identical. Eric felt the air leave his lungs. His hands began to tremble slightly, and he had to make a conscious effort to maintain his composure. Beside him, Isabel also seemed to notice something, her eyes fixed on the waitress with a curiosity that went beyond normal. "Good evening, and welcome to La Maison," Sophia began with a professional smile, but her voice trailed off as she met Isabel's gaze. For a moment, the two girls stared at each other with disconcerting intensity. "Isabel?" The name escaped Sophia's lips in a barely audible whisper, as if it were an echo of a memory she didn't know she had. Eric watched the scene with his heart racing. How did that waitress know his daughter's name? Why did she look so much like Isabel? Questions multiplied in his mind as long-suppressed memories began to surface. The night in the hospital 10 years ago came back to him with frightening clarity. The nervous doctors, the nurses avoiding his gaze, the confusion over what had happened to the second baby. At the time, devastated by the loss of Emilia and focused on caring for Isabel, he had accepted the vague explanations about the second twin not making it. Have you worked here long?" Eric managed to ask, his voice hoarser than usual. "Only a few months, sir. The restaurant belongs to my mother, Elena," Sophia replied, still looking disturbed by her inexplicable encounter with Isabel. The name hit Eric like a punch to the gut. Elena, Emilia's old friend, who had mysteriously disappeared from their lives shortly after Isabel was born. The pieces were beginning to fit together in a way he wasn't ready to accept. "Daddy, she looks so much like me," Isabel whispered, tugging on Eric's jacket sleeve. "It's like I'm seeing myself in the future." Sophia composed herself, professionally, though her hands shook slightly as she took their orders. Throughout the meal, Eric couldn't focus on the food or the conversation. His eyes kept drifting back to Sophia, who moved around the room with an effortless grace that reminded him of Emilia, in a way that was painfully familiar. By the time dinner was over, Eric was certain his life was about to change drastically. Years of buried doubts were beginning to resurface, demanding answers. He needed to find out the truth about that night in the hospital, about Elena, about Sophia. As he left the restaurant, carrying a sleepy Isabel in his arms, Eric made a silent promise to Emilia. He would find out what really happened that night, and if his suspicions were correct, if Sophia was who he was beginning to believe she was, nothing in the world would stop him from reconnecting his shattered family. The Porsche disappeared into the São Paulo night, leaving behind a restaurant where a young waitress stood by the window, watching the car drive away with an expression of confusion and recognition on her face so similar to Isabel's. The first act of that story was just beginning, and secrets buried for a decade were beginning to emerge from the shadows of the past. The morning after dinner, Eric could barely concentrate on his routine. Sitting in his office on the top floor of the Müller building in the heart of the city's financial district, he gazed out at the city through the 40th floor windows, but his mind was elsewhere, lost in memories of the night before. On his mahogany desk, an old photo of Emilia smiled at him. Next to it, a more recent one showed Isabel on her last birthday. Eric picked up both photos and, for the first time, began to analyze each feature in detail. The resemblance between Emilia, Isabel, and Sophia was undeniable, beyond mere coincidence. "Mr. Müller, your board meeting starts in 5 minutes, his secretary announced over the intercom. "Cancel all my appointments for today, Agnes. An urgent personal matter has come up," he replied, already reaching for his jacket. Before leaving, Eric opened his personal safe and took out a yellowed folder. This was where he kept all the documents related to Isabel's birth and Emilia's departure. For the first time in 10 years, he allowed himself to examine those papers with a truly critical eye. The medical report was oddly vague about the second baby. There were no specific details, just a brief mention of complications. No formal certificate, no detailed documentation. How had he not questioned this before? Eric drove to the Hospital São Lucas, where everything had happened. The imposing building still caused a tight feeling in his chest. It was there that he lived the happiest and saddest day of his life. At the front desk, he used his influence to gain access to the old files. The clerk, recognizing his last name, asked no questions when he requested the complete records from that night. "Mr. Miller," a familiar voice called out to him as he waited. It was Dr. Helena Rossi, who had been a resident when Emilia was born. "What a surprise to see you here after so long." Eric noticed how she paled slightly when she recognized him. "Dr. Helena, what a coincidence. I was just looking for information about Isabel's birth." "Oh, and may I ask why?" After all, this time, she nervously adjusted her glasses. "Yesterday I met a girl named Sophia," Eric said, watching her reaction closely. "She looks just like my daughter." Helena dropped the clipboard she was holding. Her hands shook as she picked it up. "Eric, there are things from the past that perhaps it would be best not to disturb." "What things, Dr. Helena? What happened that night that I don't know about?" The doctor looked around nervously. I mustn't. Look for Elena. She has the answers you seek." Before Eric could insist, Helena quickly walked away, leaving him even more puzzled. The employee returned with a confused expression. "I'm sorry, Mr. Miller, but we have been unable to locate the complete records for that date. Apparently, there was a problem with the filing system a few years ago, and several documents were lost." Eric left the hospital with more questions than answers. He decided to go to the registry office where Isabel's birth certificate had been filed. Using his influence again, he was able to gain access to the files. What he found left him even more disturbed. There was an inconsistency in the timings. The official record marked Isabel's birth at 11:45 p.m., but he was absolutely certain that the babies had been born in the morning. Why would anyone change that detail? Her cell phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number. Not all truths were buried with Emilia. Some people know more than they say. Eric felt a chill. Who was sending that message? How did they know? He was investigating. He decided to return to La Maison, this time during the day. The restaurant was closed for lunch, but he could see movement through the windows. He knocked on the door with determination. Elena herself answered, her face transformed when she saw him. "Eric, I knew you'd come back. We need to talk, Elena, about Sophia, about that night in the hospital, about Emilia." Elena took a deep breath, as if bracing herself for something inevitable. "Come in, but I warn you, the truth you seek may change everything." As he followed Elena into the empty restaurant, Eric noticed Sophia watching the scene from afar, partially hidden behind a kitchen door. Her gaze was a mixture of curiosity and fear. "Before we begin," Elena said, indicating a table in the distance, "I need you to understand one thing. Everything that was done out of love. Emilia wanted it that way." "What did Emilia want? What are you saying?" Elena pulled a yellowed envelope from her apron pocket. "Emilia gave this to me a few days before the birth. She made me promise to only give it to you if something like this happened." Eric took the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a handwritten letter in his wife's delicate, familiar handwriting. The first few words made his heart stop. "My love, if you are reading this, it means that our worst fears have been confirmed. The girls need to be protected." The businessman looked up from the letter, meeting Eleanor's heavy gaze. "Protected from what? From whom?" "Keep reading," Elena replied simply. "Emilia will tell you everything." With his heart racing, Eric carefully unfolded the aged paper. Emilia's soft scent still lingered on the pages, like a ghost from the past materialized in his hands. He began to read, while Eleanor remained in respectful silence. "My love, if you are reading this letter, it means that my suspicions have been confirmed, and I am no longer by your side to protect our daughters. I know you must be confused and hurt by everything you are discovering, but I need you to understand, every decision I made was with the safety of our girls in mind." Weeks before the birth, I discovered something terrible about her family, specifically her father, Alex. Documents I found in his office revealed a scheme involving our family assets and our daughters' futures. Alex planned to use the birth of the twins to gain full control of the Müller companies. There is a clause in your grandfather's will that you were never told about. If twins were born into the family, the inheritance would be divided equally between them when they turned 18. Your father altered documents to hide this information, fearing that he would lose control over the empire he had built. When I confronted Alex with these findings, he threatened me. He said that accidents happen, and that it would be a shame if something happened to one of the babies. Knowing his father as I do, I knew these were not empty words. Eric had to stop reading for a moment, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold the paper. Memories of his father, Alex, an authoritarian control freak, flooded his mind. Alex had left on an international trip shortly after the girls were born and never returned, settling permanently in Switzerland. Continued. Reading. It was then that I sought help from Elena, my most trusted friend. Together we devised a plan to protect our daughters. If anything were to happen to me during the birth, one of the girls would be taken away, raised safely, away from Alex's clutches and his sick ambitions. I know you must be wondering why I didn't tell you all this before. My love, you've always been so close to your father, so loyal to your family. I was afraid you wouldn't believe me, that Alex's manipulation would be stronger than my words. And more than that, I was afraid. For your safety too. Elena promised to take care of one of the girls as if she were her own daughter, keeping her safe until the right time. If you are reading this letter, it means that that time has come. It means that you have found our Sophia and realized the truth for yourself. Eric, I know you must be feeling anger, betrayal, and pain, but I ask you to understand. It was the only way to ensure that both of our daughters would grow up safely. Alex would never suspect that only one of the girls had survived. Now that you know the truth, I need you to be cautious. Alex may be long gone, but his power and influence are still real. Protect our girls. Give them time to get to know each other, to build the bonds they should have had from the beginning. And most of all, forgive Elena. She risked everything to keep our daughters safe. Every decision we made was out of love. Love for our girls, love for you. Forever yours, Emilia. Eric looked up from the letter, meeting not only Elena's anxious gaze, but also Sophia's, who had silently approached him while he was reading. The girl had tears in her eyes, as if she finally understood why she had always felt an inexplicable emptiness in her life. "Why now?" Eric asked Elena, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Why did you allow us to meet?" "Because Alex is sick," Elena replied softly. "Terminal, no longer a threat. And because Sophia started asking questions about her past, questions I could no longer avoid." Sophia took a step forward, her voice trembling slightly. "So, you're really my father, and Isabel is my twin sister." Eric nodded, unable to hold back his own tears. "Sophia, all these years, if I had known—" "No," Elena interrupted firmly. "Don't blame yourself. Emilia was right about everything. Alex would have done anything to maintain control of the other company. Anything." The silence that followed was broken by the sound of the restaurant door opening. It was Isabel, who had convinced her nanny to bring her there after school, driven by an intuition that not even she understood. The two sisters looked at each other again, this time with the complete knowledge of who they really were. They were no longer strangers, connected by an inexplicable sense of familiarity. They were parts of the same story, separated by circumstances that went far beyond their understanding. Eric looked at his daughters, feeling both immense joy and crushing weight. The truth had been revealed, but this was only the beginning of a much more complex journey. How could he rebuild 10 years of separation? How could he protect his daughters now that the secret was out? And most importantly, how to deal with the legacy of lies and manipulation that his own father had created. The silence at La Maison was palpable, charged with raw emotion. Eric watched his daughters, Isabel and Sophia, staring at each other with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. The revelation still hung in the air, heavy as a storm cloud about to break. Isabel was the first to break the silence. "So, we're the same age." Her voice was small, almost a whisper. Sophia nodded, a shy smile forming on her lips. "I guess so. Do we share the same birthday?" "March 23rd, they replied in unison, eliciting an emotional sob from Eric. The businessman took a step forward, unsure of how to proceed. Part of him wanted to hug Sophia, to make up for a decade of absence in a single gesture, but he knew he couldn't. Trust and affection would have to be built gradually. "Girls," he began, choosing his words carefully, "I know this is a shock to all of us. We're going to need time to process all of this." Elena intervened, her voice gentle but firm. "Sophia, darling, I know you must be confused and scared. I want you to know that no matter what happens, you will always be my daughter. The love I feel for you is real." Sophia looked at the woman who raised her, tears streaming down her face. "But you lied to me all these years." "To protect you," Elena replied, her voice cracking. "Every day has been a struggle between wanting to tell you the truth and being afraid of what might happen if I did." Eric could see the conflict in Sophia's eyes. She was torn between the family she had always known and the promise of a new connection with her biological father and sister. "Sophia," he said softly, "I'm not here to take you away from Elena. She's your mother in every way that matters. I'm here because I want to know you, to be a part of your life if you'll let me." Isabel, who had been watching everything in silence until then, took a hesitant step towards her sister. "I've always wanted a sister," she said, timidly extending her hand. Isabel's simple gesture seemed to melt some of the tension in the room. Sophia, after a moment of hesitation, took her sister's hand. The touch seemed to spark something between them, a connection that went beyond words or rational understanding. "What happens now?" Sophia asked, looking between Eleanor and Eric. Eric took a deep breath. "Right now we need to be patient. We have a lot to talk about, a lot to discover about each other, but we don't need to solve everything today." Elena nodded. "Sophia, if you want, we can start with visits. You can get to know Eric and Isabel better. Take your time." The idea seemed to please everyone. It was a cautious first step towards an uncertain but possible future. In the days that followed, Eric found himself torn between the joy of rediscovering his lost daughter and his growing anger toward his father. Alex, even far away in Switzerland, still cast a shadow over their lives. A week after the revelation, Eric finally plucked up the courage to confront his father. The video call revealed an aged and visibly ill Alex, but his eyes still shone with the same determination as ever. "So you figured it out," Alex said bluntly as soon as he saw his son's face. "How could you, father?" Eric's voice shook with suppressed emotion. "Threaten your own granddaughters, all for money and power?" Alex showed no remorse. "I did what was necessary to protect the family legacy. You were too young to understand." "Understand what? That you were willing to sacrifice an innocent child? Sacrifices are necessary to maintain power, Eric. One day you will understand." The conversation ended in a bitter stalemate. Eric hung up, feeling even more determined to protect his daughters and repair the damage caused by their father's actions. Meanwhile, Isabel and Sophia began to build a relationship. Meetings in the park, afternoons watching movies, long conversations about their separate lives. Each moment was a discovery. They shared surprisingly similar tastes, from music to food, reinforcing the genetic bond that united them. Eric watched his daughters approach with a mixture of joy and apprehension. He was happy to see them getting along, but he feared that the shadow of the past could at any moment threaten this new happiness. A month after the revelation, during a dinner at the Müller mansion, Sophia asked a question that everyone was dreading but knew would eventually come. "Eric, can I call you Dad?" The silence that followed was deafening. Isabel froze, her fork halfway to her mouth. Eric felt his heart race. "Sophia, I would be honored," he replied, struggling to keep his voice steady. "But only if you really feel comfortable with it. I don't want you to feel pressured." Sophia smiled, a smile that reminded her so much of Emilia that it made Eric's heart ache. "I think I'm ready, but that doesn't mean I'll stop calling Elena Mom." "Not for a second would I expect that," Eric assured. That night, after Sophia had left and Isabel was in bed, Eric allowed himself a moment of reflection in his office. The photo of Emilia on his desk seemed to smile at him, as if approving of the recent events. He picked up his phone and typed a message to Elena. "Thank you for everything you did for Sophia, for keeping the promise you made to Emilia. I know it must not have been easy." The answer came almost immediately. "I did what any mother would do. I protected my daughter, our daughter." Eric smiled, feeling, for the first time in years, that despite all the challenges they still faced, his family was finally on the right path to healing. The weeks that followed brought a new routine for the Müller family. Eric struggled to balance his professional life with time spent with his daughters, now including Sophia in activities that he had previously only done with Isabel. The sisters, in turn, grew closer and closer, discovering surprising similarities and intriguing differences in their personalities. On a sunny Saturday afternoon, Eric watched the girls playing in the mansion's garden. Isabel was teaching Sophia how to play tennis, laughing at her sister's clumsy attempts. It was a scene that warmed his heart, but it also brought a pang of sadness when he thought of all the lost years. His moment of contemplation was interrupted by the ringing of his cell phone. It was an unknown number. "Mr. Müller?" A deep, hesitant male voice came from the other end of the line. "This is Dr. Ricardo Hoffman. I was the obstetrician who delivered your wife's baby 10 years ago." Eric's blood ran cold. Dr. Hoffman had mysteriously disappeared shortly after the twins were born. His absence was one of many pieces that didn't fit together. "Dr. Hoffman," Eric managed to reply, trying to keep his voice calm. "After all this time, why are you calling me now?" There was a tense pause before he answered. "Because it's time for the truth to come out. Your wife, Emilia, she made me promise to keep it a secret. But now that I know you found out about Sophia, I feel I must tell you everything I know." Eric looked back at the girls in the garden, so oblivious to the gathering storm. "Where can we meet?" Half an hour later, Eric was sitting in an inconspicuous cafe in the city center. Dr. Hoffman, now a middle-aged man with graying hair and deep circles under his eyes, seemed to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. "Your wife came to me weeks before the birth," the doctor began, his voice low and weary. "She was terrified. She said she had discovered something about her father-in-law, something that put the babies at risk." Eric nodded, remembering Amelia's letter. "She mentioned threats from my father." "These weren't just empty threats," Dr. Hoffman continued, a tremor in his voice. "The night of the birth, there were complications. Amelia was losing a lot of blood. That's when her father showed up at the hospital." The doctor paused, as if gathering the courage to continue. "He offered me an obscene amount of money to declare that one of the babies had not survived. He said it was for the good of the family, to protect the Müller legacy." Eric felt a wave of nausea. "And you accepted?" Dr. Hoffman looked down, shame evident on his face. "Not right away. But Alex had compromising information about me, past medical errors that could destroy my career. He cornered me." "So you falsified the records," Eric concluded, his voice cold. "Yes," the doctor admitted. "But Amelia, she suspected something like this might happen. She had a plan with her friend, Elena. As soon as the babies were born, and it was clear that they were both healthy, Elena took one of them away before her father could even intervene." Eric tried to process all the information. "And then? Why did you disappear?" "Alex discovered I knew too much. He threatened me. He told me I had better disappear if I wanted to keep breathing. I spent the last 10 years living in fear, moving from city to city. The silence that followed was heavy, laden with painful revelations and long-buried truths." "Why go back now?" Eric finally asked. Dr. Hoffman looked up, a gleam of determination in his weary gaze. "Because I'm tired of running. Because your daughters deserve to know the whole truth. And because I want to do the right thing, for once in my life." Eric took it all in, feeling a mixture of anger, sadness, and surprisingly relief. Finally, the pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place. "What do you intend to do now?" he asked the doctor. "I am willing to testify, to tell everything to the authorities if necessary, Dr. B." Hoffman responded. "I know it could cost me my freedom, but it is the least I can do to try to correct my mistakes." Eric nodded slowly. "I'll need time to think about what to do with this information, but I appreciate your honesty, even if it's belated." As Eric left the cafe, he felt the weight of the revelations on his shoulders. He now had concrete proof of his father's actions, but exposing everything could have unpredictable consequences for his family and the business. Driving home, his mind raced with possibilities and ethical dilemmas. How to tell the girls about the true circumstances of their birth? How to deal with the toxic legacy left by their father without destroying everything his family had built? When he arrived at the mansion, he found Isabel and Sophia still in the garden, now lying on the grass, watching the clouds and laughing at something that only they understood. The scene reminded him of what really mattered: his daughter's future, the chance to build something new and better from the ruins of the past. Eric made a decision in that moment. He would protect his daughters and honor Amelia's memory, but he would not allow the mistakes of the past to define the future of the Müller family. The truth would come out, but on his terms, in a way that could finally bring peace and justice for all involved. With that thought, he walked towards his daughters, determined to enjoy every precious moment with them, while behind the scenes, the gears of profound change began to move. The days that followed his conversation with Dr. Hoffman were a whirlwind of emotions for Eric. He was torn between the need to act on the information he now had and the desire to protect the fragile happiness his daughters were beginning to build together. One particularly tense afternoon, Eric decided he needed some advice. He arranged to meet Antonio, his longtime lawyer and personal friend, at a discreet restaurant in the city center. "Leo, you look like you've seen a ghost," Antonio commented as soon as they sat down. "What's going on?" Eric sighed deeply before beginning to narrate the recent events, from Sophia's discovery to Dr. Hoffman's revelations. Antonio listened attentively, his expression wavering between shock and concern. "Oh my God, Leo," Antonio finally said when Eric finished. This is bombshell. The legal implications of this are enormous. Falsifying medical records, coercion, possible fraud in the business succession. Your father could face serious criminal consequences." "I know," Eric replied, running his hands over his tired face. "But it's not just that. Exposing all this publicly, it could destroy the company's legacy, affect thousands of jobs. And the girls, how would that affect Isabel and Sophia?" Antonio considered for a moment. "We have to think strategically here, Leo. There is a possibility of resolving this internally, without a public scandal, but you will have to confront your father." The thought of confronting Alex sent a chill down Eric's spine. Despite everything, a part of him still struggled with the image of the powerful, intimidating father he had known all his life. "What if he denies everything?" Eric asked. "Then we use the evidence we have," Antonio replied firmly. "Dr. Hoffman's testimony, Emilia's letter, the inconsistent hospital records. We can build a solid case." Eric nodded slowly, a resolution forming in his mind. "I need to talk to Elena first. She deserves to know what we're planning, and I think it's time to tell the girls the whole truth." In the days that followed, Eric prepared himself emotionally for the difficult conversations that lay ahead. He began with Elena, inviting her to coffee at the Müller mansion. "Elena," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "first, I want to thank you again for everything you did for Sophia. You protected her when I couldn't." Elena smiled sadly. "I love her like she's my own daughter, Eric. I always will." "I know," he replied, "and that's why you need to be involved in what comes next." Eric then told her about his conversation with Dr. Hoffman and his plans to confront Alex. Elena listened in silence, silent tears streaming down her face. When Eric finished, she took a deep breath before speaking. "I always knew this day would come, that the truth would come out, but I never imagined—" "Eric, what will happen to Sophia?" "Nothing will change the fact that you are her mother," Eric assured her, "but she deserves to know the whole truth about her birth, about Emilia. Both girls deserve it." Eleanor nodded slowly. "You're right. They've spent too long living, with half-truths and secrets. When do you plan on telling them?" "Tonight," Eric replied, feeling the weight of the decision. "I wish you were there." That night, the living room of the Müller mansion was filled with tension. Isabel and Sophia sat side by side on the sofa, their expressions a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Eric and Elena sat in armchairs across from them, exchanging nervous glances. "Girls," Eric began, his voice soft but firm, "there is something very important we need to tell you. It's about the day you were born, about your mother, Emilia, and about why you were separated." Over the next 2 hours, Eric and Eleanor told the entire story, from Emilia's discoveries about Alex to the events at the hospital and the decision to separate the twins. They were careful to tailor certain details to the girls' ages, but they were honest about the motives and consequences of everyone involved's actions. Isabel and Sophia listened in silence, their expressions running through a range of emotions: shock, sadness, anger, and finally painful understanding. When they finished, Sophia was the first to speak, her voice trembling slightly. "So, our mother separated us to protect us?" Eric nodded, feeling a lump in his throat. "She did what she thought was necessary to keep you both safe." Isabel, who had been quiet until then, suddenly stood up, tears in her eyes. "And Grandpa, did he really want to hurt one of us?" Eric knelt in front of her, holding her hands. "Your grandfather, he made terrible mistakes, Belle. But the important thing is that you two are safe and together now." The girls embraced, crying together for the first time, no longer as newfound strangers, but as sisters bound together by a painful past and an uncertain future. Elena joined in the embrace, whispering comforting words. Eric watched the scene, feeling a mixture of pain and relief. The truth was finally out, but the road ahead was still long and uncertain. As he comforted his daughters, Eric knew the next step would be the hardest, confronting his father and demanding answers. But now, with the truth out in the open and his family united, he felt stronger than ever. The night wore on, and in the Müller mansion, a newly reunited family began to process their shared past and imagine a future together, free from the secrets that had for so long kept them apart. The sun had barely risen when Eric boarded his private jet bound for Zurich. The decision to confront Alex in person was made after a sleepless night of reflection on everything he had learned. He knew that a phone call or video conference would not be enough to deal with the magnitude of what his father had done. During the flight, Eric alternated between reviewing documents that Antonio had prepared and looking at photos of Isabel and Sophia on his cell phone. The images of the girls smiling together gave him strength for what was to come. When he landed in Switzerland, a mixture of anxiety and determination filled him. The driver waiting for him took him straight to Alex's luxurious mansion on the outskirts of Zurich, an imposing property overlooking the lake. Eric, Alex's weak but still authoritative voice echoed through the foyer. The Müller patriarch sat in a wheelchair, looking much older and frailer than he had the last time they had seen each other. "What a surprise to see you here." "Dad," Eric replied, his voice firm. "We need to talk." Alex gestured toward the office, and his assistant led them there. Once they were alone, the air was thick with decades of secrets and unspoken lies. "So," Alex began, a cynical smile on his lips, "I take it you didn't come all this way to ask about my health." Eric took a deep breath, controlling the anger that threatened to boil over. "I know everything, Father, about the twins, about your threats, about how you manipulated Dr. Hoffman." For a moment, Alex looked surprised, but then his expression hardened. "And what do you intend to do with this information, my son?" "I want to hear from you," Eric replied, leaning forward. "I want to understand how you could threaten your own granddaughters, how you could lie to me all these years." Alex let out a bitter laugh. "See? You've always been too naive, Eric. In the business world, sometimes sacrifices are necessary to maintain power." "Sacrifices?" Eric repeated in disbelief. "We're talking about children, Father, my daughters." "I did what had to be done to protect the Müller legacy," Alex snapped, his voice gaining strength. "Do you think I built this empire on sentimental grounds? The clause in your grandfather's will could have divided everything we built. I couldn't allow that." Eric felt a wave of nausea. "And so you were willing to, what, make one of my daughters disappear?" Alex didn't answer right away, his gaze lost in the view out the window. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, almost reflective. "I would never have hurt the girls, Eric, but I needed to make sure only one of them was recognized as the heir. And that's why you manipulated Dr. Hoffman, threatened Eleanor, lied to me for years." "I did what was necessary," Alex replied, turning back to face his son. "And it worked, didn't it? Müller Enterprises is stronger than ever. Your future, Isabel's future, is secure." Eric stood up, unable to contain his frustration. "At what cost, Father? You've torn our family apart. You've deprived my daughters of growing up together, of getting to know each other." "And now they know each other," Alex retorted, a hint of irritation in his voice. "What do you want from me, Eric? An apology? Repentance?" Eric stared at him for a long moment, searching for any sign of remorse in his father's eyes. He found none. "I want you to take responsibility for what you did, legally." Alex raised an eyebrow. "You intend to sue me? Your own father?" "No," Eric replied, his voice firm. "But I want you to sign a confession detailing your actions. In exchange, we won't take this to the authorities." "What if I refuse?" Eric laid out the documents Antonio had prepared on the table. "Then we'll use all the evidence we have, Dr. Hoffman's testimony, the falsified records, everything, and let justice decide." A tense silence fell across the office. Alex stared at the documents, his expression unreadable. Finally, he looked up at his son. "You've become tougher than I thought, Eric." "I learned from the best," Eric replied humorlessly. After what seemed like an eternity, Alex picked up a pen. "You do understand that this could affect the company's reputation, right?" "The company will survive," Eric said, "and it will be better, more ethical." As Alex read and signed the documents, Eric felt a weight lift from his shoulders. It was the end of an era, the closing of a dark chapter in his family's history. When he was done, Alex looked older and more tired than ever. "What now?" "Now," Eric replied, putting away the papers, "you're going to step away from the business completely. You're going to live out your retirement here, away from the city, away from the girls." Alex nodded slowly. "What about them?" "Isabel. And Sophia, right? What are you going to tell them about me?" Eric paused in the doorway, looking at his father one last time. "The truth, father. Always the truth from now on." As he left the mansion, Eric felt as if he were breathing fresh air for the first time in years. The confrontation with Alex marked not only the end of a lie, but the beginning of a new chapter for the Müller family. On the flight back to the city, as he watched the clouds through the plane window, Eric thought about his daughters, about Eleanor, and about the future they could now build together, free from the shadows of the past. The journey would be long, but for the first time in a long time he felt hope. Eric's return to the city was marked by a mixture of relief and apprehension. With Alex's confession in hand, he knew that a dark chapter in his family history had been closed, but the challenge of rebuilding family ties had only just begun. In the days that followed, Eric devoted himself entirely to his daughters. Isabel and Sophia, still processing the recent revelations, oscillated between moments of intense closeness and periods of reflective distance. On a sunny Saturday afternoon, Eric decided to take the girls on a picnic in Ibirapuera Park. It was the first time they had been out together in public since the truth came out. "Dad," Isabel asked as they arranged the towel under a large tree, "will people know about us? About Sophia being my sister?" Eric paused, choosing his words carefully. "Eventually, yes, but we'll deal with it together as a family." Sophia, who was helping to organize the sandwiches, looked up. What if people don't understand?" "Then we'll explain," Eric replied gently. "The important thing is that we know the truth and we're together now." The girls exchanged glances, a silent understanding passing between them. Little by little, the initial tension dissipated, replaced by laughter and lively conversations about school, friends, and plans for the future. Watching his daughters, Eric couldn't help but notice how different and yet incredibly similar they were. Isabel, raised in luxury, had a natural confidence that sometimes bordered on arrogance. Sophie, on the other hand, was more reserved, with a maturity that came from her more modest upbringing. "You know," Sophia commented as she nibbled on an apple, "I never thought I'd have a sister. It's weird, but in a good way." Isabel smiled, hesitantly. "I've always wanted a sister, someone to share secrets with, you know." "We can start now," Sophia suggested, a mischievous glint in her eyes. "How about telling him something Daddy doesn't know?" Eric pretended to be offended. "Hey, no fair! I'm right here!" The girls laughed, and for a moment they seemed like just two normal sisters sharing an afternoon in the park with their father. The following week, Eric faced another challenge: integrating Sophia into the Müller family's life without diminishing Elena's role. After much discussion, they decided on an informal joint custody arrangement. Sophia would spend half the week at the Müller mansion, and the other half with Elena. The adjustment was not easy. Sophia's first night at the mansion was marked by silent tears and a late-night phone call to Elena. Isabel, meanwhile, struggled with conflicting feelings of excitement at having a sister and jealousy at the attention Sophia received. Eric struggled to balance the emotional needs of both his daughters, often feeling inadequate and overwhelmed. It was on one of these difficult nights that he found unexpected support in Eleanor. "How did you do this alone for so many years?" he asked, exhausted, during a late-night phone conversation. Elena laughed softly. "One day at a time, Eric, and with much love." Inspired by Elena's resilience, Eric redefined his priorities. He delegated more responsibilities within the company, determined to be there for every important moment in his daughters' lives. A month after returning from Zurich, the family faced their first major public challenge: Isabel's school was organizing an end-of-year party, and Sophia was invited to attend. It would be the first time the twins would appear together at a social event. The buzz started as soon as they arrived. Curious glances, barely concealed, whispers and even a few cell phone flashes accompanied their entrance. Eric could feel the tension emanating from his daughters. It was Isabel who surprised everyone. Taking Sophia's hand, she walked straight to the center of the room, where a group of her friends were gathered. "Guys," she announced, her voice clear and confident, "this is my sister Sophia. We have a lot to tell you." Isabel's simple but powerful gesture broke the tension. Soon, Sophia was engaged in lively conversation, sharing stories and laughing with her new friends. Eric watched from a distance, his heart brimming with pride. Elena, who had been invited to the event, joined him. "They'll be fine," she commented, a soft smile on her lips. "Yes," Eric agreed, "I think they will." As the party continued around him, Eric reflected on the journey of the past few months. It had been a difficult road, full of painful revelations and emotional challenges. But standing there, watching his daughters united, laughing and supporting each other, he knew that every obstacle had been worth it. The future still held many challenges. There would be legal issues to resolve, adjustments to the company structure, and the constant work of strengthening family ties. But in that moment, watching Isabel and Sophia dance together, Eric felt a deep certainty. His family, once fractured by the secrets of the past, was now on the right path to healing and unity. The night wore on, and with it, the promise of a new chapter in the Müller story, a chapter written not with secrets and lies, but with truth, love, and the strength of family bonds finally restored. The months that followed brought a series of changes for the Müller family. With the arrival of the new year, Eric decided it was time to implement significant changes, not only in his personal life, but also in the family business. One January morning, Eric called a special board meeting of Müller Enterprises. The large conference room at the top of the company's headquarters building was packed with eager and curious executives. "Ladies and gentlemen," Eric began, his firm voice echoing around the room, "we are here to discuss not only the future of our company, but also its core values." In the minutes that followed, Eric outlined an ambitious restructuring plan. Müller Enterprises would no longer be a profit-driven conglomerate, but a corporation with a strong social responsibility. He announced the creation of a foundation dedicated to supporting vulnerable children, inspired by the story of his own daughters. "Our family history has taught us a valuable lesson about the power of truth and unity," he explained. "I want that lesson to be reflected in everything we do as a company." The board's reaction was mixed. Some more conservative executives expressed concern about the financial impact of the proposed changes. Others, particularly younger ones, expressed enthusiasm for the new direction. By the end of the meeting, Eric felt exhausted but satisfied. It was the first step on a long journey, but he was determined to transform the Müller legacy into something his daughters could be truly proud of. Meanwhile, at home, Isabel and Sophia continued their own journey of discovery and adaptation. Daily life brought challenges, but also moments of deep connection. One afternoon, Eric came home to find the girls in Isabel's room, surrounded by old photo albums. "What are you guys doing?" he asked curiously. Sophia looked up, a shy smile on her lips. "We're looking at pictures of Mom. Isabel is telling me stories about her." Eric felt a tightness in his chest. He sat down with his daughters, and together they spent hours reminiscing about Emilia. For Sophia, it was like discovering a part of herself that had always been missing. For Isabel, it was a chance to share precious memories. And for Eric, it was a chance to heal old wounds. "She would have loved to see you two together," he said softly, hugging the girls. The following weeks brought new challenges and joys. Sophia began attending the same school as Isabel, a decision that initially caused anxiety, but proved to be a positive one for both of them. Together they faced the curious looks and the occasional mean comments with a strength that surprised everyone. Elena, meanwhile, found a new purpose. Inspired by Eric's foundation, she volunteered to lead programs for single mothers and foster children. Her personal experience became a valuable source of empathy and understanding. One day, during a family dinner that now regularly included Elena, Isabel asked a question that took everyone by surprise. "Dad, do you think we'll be able to meet Grandpa Alex one day?" The silence that followed was tense. Eric exchanged glances with Elena, seeking guidance. "Girls," he began carefully, "the relationship with your grandfather is complicated. He made serious mistakes that affected our family deeply." "But he's still family, isn't he?" Sophia questioned, her voice soft but firm. Eric took a deep breath. "Yes, he is. And maybe one day when you're older and can fully understand what happened, we can consider it. But for now, I think it's best if we keep our distance." The girls seemed to accept the explanation, though Eric could see that the subject was not completely closed. He made a mental note to address Alex's issue in more depth in the future, when the girls were ready. As the year progressed, the new family dynamic solidified. Eric learned to better balance his time between work and family. Isabel and Sophia, although they still had their moments of rivalry, developed a complicity that only sisters can have. One quiet evening, as Eric watched the girls study together in the living room, he received an unexpected message. It was a photo of a visibly frail Alex holding a newspaper, highlighting the positive changes at Miller Enterprises. The message simply read, "You're doing a good job, son." Eric stared at the message for a long time, a whirlwind of emotions in his chest. He didn't respond, but he kept the photo. Maybe one day there would be room for another chapter in this story of family redemption. The sound of Isabel and Sophia's laughter brought him back to the present. Looking at his daughters, Eric felt a surge of gratitude and hope. The road ahead was still long and would certainly have its challenges, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like they were all heading in the right direction. The Müller family, once divided by secrets and lies, now grew stronger every day, united by truth and love. And as the sun set over the city, Eric made a silent promise to Amelia, wherever she was. He would do everything in his power to ensure that his daughter's future would be bright, honest, and filled with love. Time passed quickly, and before the Müller family knew it, 2 years had passed since the twins were reunited. Isabel and Sophia, now 12 years old, were on the verge of entering adolescence, bringing with them a new wave of challenges and discoveries. It was a Saturday morning when Eric was awakened by a sound that had become familiar in recent months. Isabel and Sophia arguing. Sighing, he got up and went to the girls' room. "What's going on here?" he asked, finding the two of them amidst a pile of scattered clothes. "Dad!" Isabel exclaimed, frustrated. "Sophia took my new blouse without asking." Sophia rolled her eyes. "I just wanted to try it on. Besides, you never wear that top." Eric took a deep breath, remembering the words of his family therapist. Conflicts are normal. What matters is how we deal with them. "Girls," he began calmly, "let's talk about this. Isabel, how did you feel when you saw Sophia in your shirt?" Isabel hesitated for a moment. "I felt invaded, like my things weren't really mine." Eric nodded, then turned to Sophia. "What about you, Sophia? Why didn't you ask permission?" Sophia looked down. I wanted to feel like Isabel for a moment. She always looked so confident in her fashionable clothes." The silence that followed was telling. Eric realized there was more to this discussion than just a blouse. "You know," he said, sitting on the bed between them, "you're sisters, but you're unique individuals. You don't have to be the same to be close." The girls exchanged glances, the tension beginning to dissipate. "How about we do something different today?" Eric suggested. "Let's have a shopping day, but with one rule. We each pick out clothes for each other." The idea was met with enthusiasm, and soon the three were at the mall, laughing and having fun as they explored different styles. It was an opportunity not only to update their wardrobes, but for the sisters to learn more about each other. Meanwhile, at Miller Enterprises, the changes Eric had implemented were beginning to show positive results. The company's new foundation had helped hundreds of children, and the company's reputation was improving every day. However, not everything was rosy. One tense afternoon, Eric received a worrying call from Antonio, his lawyer. "Leo," Antonio's voice sounded grave, "we have a problem. An old business partner of your father's is threatening to expose the entire story of the twins' separation to the press." Eric felt his stomach sink. What? How did he find out? Apparently, Alex trusted him years ago. Now, with the changes in the company, he feels he is losing influence and wants to use that as blackmail. Eric ran his hand over his face, feeling the weight of the situation. "What can we do?" "We have two options," Antonio explained. "We can try to negotiate with him, or we can step up and tell the story on our terms." After hours of deliberation, Eric made a courageous decision. He would call a press conference and tell the whole truth, protecting his daughters from unwanted exposure and taking control of the narrative. The night before the press conference, Eric gathered Isabel, Sophia, and Eleanor in the living room. "Girls, Helena," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "tomorrow I will tell our story to the world. I want you to know that no matter what happens, what truly matters is the love we have built as a family." Isabel and Sophia, realizing the gravity of the situation, hugged their father. Eleanor, with tears in her eyes, held Eric's hand in silent support. The next day, before a packed room of journalists, Eric Muller told the story of his family, the mistakes, the lies, but also the redemption and the love that brought them together again. He spoke of Emilia's courage, Elena's sacrifice, and the resilience of his daughters. "We are here today," he concluded, "not to ask for sympathy or forgiveness, but to show that it is possible to rebuild from the truth. Our family, like many others, has its imperfections, but it is in facing those imperfections that we find our true strength." The repercussions were immediate and intense. There was criticism, of course, but also a surprising wave of support. Many families identified with the Mullers' struggle, seeing in it a reflection of their own challenges and hopes. In the weeks that followed, Eric watched with pride as Isabel and Sophia handled the new attention. They stuck together, shielding each other from prying eyes and the occasional nasty comment. A month after the press conference, during a family dinner, Sophia surprised everyone with an announcement. "I've decided I want to change my last name," she said. "I want to be a Muller like Isabel." The silence that followed was broken by Elena. "Are you sure, honey? You know you don't have to do this to be part of the family." Sophia smiled, taking Elena's hand. "I know, Mom, but I want to honor every part of my story. I can be a Muller and still be your daughter." Eric felt his heart swell with pride and love. "If that's what you want, Sophia, we'll make it happen." That night, as he watched his daughters sleep peacefully, Eric reflected on the incredible journey they had been on. The challenges were not over. Their teenage years were just beginning, and the corporate world would always bring new trials. But he knew that together they could face anything. The future, once clouded by secrets and fears, now shone with possibilities. The Muller family, forged through pain and redemption, was ready to write the next chapters of their story. Together, united and stronger than ever. Summer arrived with unusual intensity, bringing with it not only scorching heat, but also a series of changes for the Muller family. Sophia, now officially Sophia Muller, was adjusting to her new surname and the increased public attention that came with it. On a particularly hot afternoon, Eric found the girls in the mansion's pool, laughing and having fun as if there wasn't a care in the world. He smiled, grateful for these moments of normalcy amidst so much turmoil. "Dad," Isabel called, waving excitedly. "Come swim with us." Eric chuckled, shaking his head. "Maybe later, Princess. I have a surprise for you two." The girls exchanged curious glances before exiting the pool, wrapping themselves in fluffy towels. "What surprise?" Sophia asked, her eyes shining with anticipation. Eric smiled mysteriously. "How about a trip? I thought we could spend a few weeks at the beach house, just the three of us." The reaction was immediate and enthusiastic. Isabel jumped for joy, while Sophia seemed almost incredulous at the idea. "But what about work?" Sophia asked, always the more practical of the two. "Work can wait," Eric replied, surprising himself with the ease of the decision. "You're more important." In the days that followed, The Miller mansion was filled with the hustle and bustle of preparations for the trip. For Sophia, it would be her first time at the family beach house, a place full of memories for Isabel and Eric. On the eve of departure, Eleanor came to say goodbye. There was a mix of emotions in her eyes as she hugged Sophia. "Have fun, my love," she said softly, "but don't forget to call me, okay?" Sophia nodded, tears in her eyes. "I love you, Mum. Thank you for everything." Eric watched the scene with a heavy heart, once again grateful for Elena's generosity and strength. The trip to the coast was filled with laughter, songs sung in unison, and light conversation. When they arrived at the beach house, an elegant building overlooking the sea, Eric felt a wave of nostalgia. So many memories with Amelia had been made there. The days that followed were like a dream. Away from the pressures of the city, Eric rediscovered the simple joys of being a father. He taught Sophia to surf, laughed at Isabel's clumsy attempts at building sandcastles, and spent starry nights on the porch, listening to the girls share their dreams and fears. It was during one of these nights that Isabel asked a question that took Eric by surprise. "Dad, do you think Mum would be proud of us?" The silence that followed was heavy, charged with emotion. Eric looked up at the starry sky, searching for the right words. "I'm sure you do, my love," he finally replied. "Your mother loved you both more than anything. She would do anything to see you happy and together like you are now." Sophia, who had been quiet until then, spoke softly. "I wish I had met her." Eric pulled them both closer, feeling the bittersweet weight of Amelia's absence. "She's here in a way. In every smile you both have, in every act of kindness. Amelia lives on through you both." The tears came, but they weren't just tears of sadness. They were tears of healing, of acceptance, of shared love. In the weeks that followed, Eric watched his daughters blossom in unexpected ways. Isabel, always the most outgoing, surprised everyone by spending hours quietly sketching the landscape with unusual concentration. Sophia, on the other hand, came out of her shell, befriending the local kids and even trying some daring surfing maneuvers. One day, as they walked along the beach at sunset, Sophia asked a question that Eric knew would eventually come. "Dad, do you think we'll ever be able to see Grandpa Alex?" Eric stopped, staring at the horizon. The question brought up conflicting feelings that he was still learning to deal with. "Maybe," he answered honestly. "Your grandfather made some serious mistakes, but he's still family. One day, when you're older and can fully understand what happened, we can consider this." Isabel, who had been listening intently, added, "I think everyone deserves a second chance. Isn't that what you always say, Dad?" Eric smiled, touched by his daughter's unexpected wisdom. "You're right, Belle. Maybe it's time we started thinking about that." The conversation was left hanging, a possibility for the future, but not an immediate concern. For now, they were focused on enjoying every moment together, building memories that would last a lifetime. On the last night of their trip, as they sat on the sand watching the stars, Eric felt a peace he hadn't experienced in years. Looking at his daughters, so alike and yet so unique, he knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it together. "Girls," he said softly, "I want you to know how much I love you and how grateful I am that we found our way back to each other." Isabel and Sophia smiled, snuggling closer to their father. At that moment, under the starry sky, with the sound of the waves in the background, the Müller family was complete. Not perfect, but real, united and stronger than ever. As the trio watched a shooting star streak across the sky, they each made a silent wish. And though they didn't share it out loud, deep in their hearts the wish was the same, that the love they had rediscovered would continue to guide them through whatever challenges the future might bring. Returning to the city brought with it a new energy for the Müller family. The weeks at the beach had strengthened the bonds between Eric, Isabel, and Sophia in ways none of them could have anticipated. Now, facing the whirlwind of life in the big city, they felt more prepared, more united. The first day back to the routine started early. Eric, determined to maintain the work-family balance he had discovered during his vacation, made sure to have breakfast with the girls before heading to the office. "Remember," he said, kissing each of their foreheads, "we have family dinner. So tonight, we have a surprise for you." The girls exchanged curious glances, but Eric maintained the mystery, leaving with an enigmatic smile. At the office, Eric was greeted with a stack of reports and a packed schedule of meetings. But unlike in the past, he didn't feel overwhelmed. There was a new clarity in his priorities. During a particularly tense meeting about expanding the company's foundation, Eric surprised everyone with a suggestion. What if we invited Isabel and Sophia to participate in the next project? They could bring a young and fresh perspective. The idea was met with enthusiasm, especially from the younger members of the team. Eric smiled, thinking of how excited his daughters would be at the opportunity. Meanwhile, at school, Isabel and Sophia were facing their own challenges. The return to school brought with it curious glances and whispers in the hallways. The Muller family story was still a hot topic of gossip. During the break, a group of girls approached Sophia. "Is it true that you lived in a small apartment before you discovered you were rich?" one of them asked, her tone bordering on disdain. Sophia felt her face burn, but before she could respond, Isabel intervened. "So what if she did? My sister is amazing no matter where she lived before." The girls stepped back, surprised by Isabel's vehemence. Sophia looked at her sister, a grateful smile on her lips. "Thank you," she murmured. Isabel shrugged, but her smile was warm. "We're sisters. We protect each other, remember?" In the evening, the family gathered for the promised dinner. The table was set with care, and there was an air of anticipation in the air. "So what's the big surprise?" Isabel asked, barely able to contain her curiosity. Eric smiled, exchanging a knowing look with Eleanor, who had been invited to the occasion. "Well," he began, "Eleanor and I have been talking, and we think it's time to take a new step in our family." The girls looked confusedly from one adult to the other. "What we mean," Eleanor continued, "is that we'd like to make something official that's already a reality. Eric, would you like to do the honors?" Eric nodded, turning to Sophia with his eyes shining with excitement. "Sophia, my dear, we would like to know if you would accept me legally adopting you. You are already my daughter in every way that matters, but we want to make it official in the eyes of the law." Sophia was speechless, tears welling up in her eyes. "But what about Mother Elena?" she asked, her voice shaking. Elena took Sophia's hand. "I'll always be your mother, dear, that won't change. We are just expanding our family, giving you two cool parents. Like one big modern family," Isabel exclaimed, jumping out of her chair to hug Sophia. Sophia looked around the table at the smiling, loving faces. Slowly, a smile spread across her face. "Yes," she said finally. "Yes, I would love that." The celebration that followed was filled with laughter, tears, and promises for the future. As the evening wore on, Eric found himself reflecting on the incredible journey his family had been on. Later, after the girls had gone to bed and Eleanor had left, Eric found himself alone on the balcony, looking out at the city lights. He thought about Emilia, about Alex, about all the events that had brought them here. "I hope we're doing the right thing, Emilia," he murmured to the night. "I hope we're honoring your sacrifice." As if in answer, a gentle breeze blew past him, bringing the scent of flowers from the garden. Eric smiled, feeling a peace he had not experienced in a long time. The future still held challenges, of course. There would be the girls' turbulent adolescence to navigate, the ups and downs of business, and perhaps even an eventual reunion with Alex. But Eric knew that no matter what came, they would face it together. The Muller family had been forged through secrets, separation, and pain, but they emerged stronger, united by love, truth, and the courage to start over. As the stars shone brightly over the city, Eric made a silent promise. He would honor the legacy of love Emilia had left, nurture the bonds they had so carefully rebuilt, and face each new day with gratitude and hope. For in the end, Eric realized, it wasn't the Muller name or the business empire that defined their true legacy. It was the love they shared, the lessons they learned, and the family they had become. And that, he knew, was the greatest treasure of all.